Have you ever watched a multi-million-dollar tech empire burn to the ground? Grab a chair. I am not a vandal, just a systems engineer keeping this country running. When corporate suits traded my livelihood for some virtual likes, I stopped cleaning up their messes. I just let them bury themselves. Listen closely to how I turned the biggest finals week in America into a perfect stage for revenge. Hello. Welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I want to share that YouTube recently disabled our monetization, leaving us with no operating budget to keep producing the content you love. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. My name is Addie Rivera. For the past 6 years, I was the lead systems engineer at CertiGuard Solutions, a tech company based in Austin, Texas. We provided online exam monitoring platforms for the largest universities in the country. My job was simple in theory, but an absolute nightmare in practice. I had to keep the servers running seamlessly, so millions of stressed-out college kids could take their final exams without the system crashing and ruining their academic careers. I was 32 years old, functioning mostly on black coffee and a deep-seated need for order, managing a complex digital architecture that was practically bulletproof. Then came the dark ages. Our seasoned founder retired, and his controlling shares were handed down to his nephew, Julian. Julian was the quintessential corporate tech bro. He swaggered into the office on day one wearing a $600 puffer vest over a designer t-shirt, tossing around empty buzzwords like synergy, disruptive ecosystems, and hypergrowth. He did not care about uptime, server stability, or the fact that our software actually needed to work reliably. He only cared about what was trending on social media and how to make the company look like a flashy Silicon Valley unicorn, even though our core product was essentially a highly secure digital hall pass. Julian's first major executive decision was an absolute masterclass in corporate stupidity. He decided we needed a new chief innovation officer. Did he hire a seasoned industry veteran with a background in cybersecurity? Absolutely not. He hired Sierra. Sierra was a TikTok influencer famous for her tech lifestyle vlogs. Her content mostly consisted of her unboxing pastel-colored mechanical keyboards, doing Pilates, and drinking iced matcha lattes in front of dual monitors that displayed completely meaningless stock graphs. Sierra genuinely did not know the difference between random access memory and a solid-state drive, but she had 2.5 million followers, and to Julian, that was basically the equivalent of a doctorate in computer science. Disaster struck exactly 3 weeks into their chaotic reign. Sierra called an emergency all-hands meeting to unveil her grand revolutionary vision for CertiGuard. She strutted to the front of the room and announced that she was going to integrate a cutting-edge, third-party eye-tracking artificial intelligence into our testing software. According to her presentation, which was mostly just brightly colored slides with no actual data, this AI would catch cheating with high-tech precision and boost the platform's overall aesthetic appeal. I nearly choked on my coffee. She actually used the word aesthetic to describe an anti-cheating protocol. I knew the software she was talking about. It was notoriously bloated, rushed to market, and consumed bandwidth like a massive digital black hole. I immediately pushed back. I spent the next 48 hours ignoring sleep to compile a 50-page technical report. I walked into Julian's glass-walled office, dropped the thick stack of papers on his desk, and laid out the cold, hard reality of the situation. I explained, using very small words so they could understand, that this specific artificial intelligence was so terribly optimized that it would falsely flag tens of thousands of innocent students for cheating. If a student wears thick prescription glasses, the AI flags them, I explained, pointing at the data. If the lighting in their dorm room changes because a cloud passes over the sun, it flags them. If they blink too slowly or look away from the screen for more than 3 seconds to think, it flags them and kicks them out of their test. Furthermore, I showed them the math proving that forcing this incredibly heavy, poorly coded software through our existing infrastructure would instantly overload our main server cluster up in Oregon, causing a total system failure. Sierra did not even bother to look at the data I had practically bled to gather. She just stirred her iced coffee, rolled her eyes, and let out a dramatic, condescending sigh. "Addie, you are being such an outdated conservative right now," Sierra said, waving her perfectly manicured hand dismissively at my report. "You are just resistant to change because you are stuck in the past. We need to disrupt the market, not coddle your old, boring servers. The visual analytics on this AI will look amazing for our upcoming press release. Just make it happen." Julian nodded along like she had just spoken profound wisdom. I stood there, staring at two people who were about to steer a multi-million-dollar ship directly into an iceberg just because they thought the ice looked pretty. Behind my back, Sierra bypassed standard deployment protocols. She circumvented my engineering team entirely and had her bloated, untested eye-tracking artificial intelligence pushed directly into our live staging environment. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. Network latency spiked by 400% within the first 20 minutes. The staging servers began gasping for air, choking under the massive, unoptimized data loads. Central processing unit usage skyrocketed to 99% across the board, and memory leaks began pooling like digital oil spills. I sat at my desk, watching the performance graphs turn from a healthy, stable green to a panicked, bleeding red. I immediately drafted and submitted 17 high-priority warning tickets to upper management, detailing the exact points of infrastructure failure and predicting a total system collapse if this messy code ever went live. Every single ticket was closed within 1 hour. The resolution note attached to each one simply read, "Functioning as intended, closed by executive order." The very next morning, I received an uncharacteristically brief calendar invite for a mandatory sync in Conference Room B. When I walked in, Julian was leaning against the glass table, aggressively scrolling on his phone, while Brenda, the head of human resources, sat rigidly with a thick manila folder resting in front of her. The air in the room was sterile, heavy with that fake, practiced corporate empathy that always precedes an execution. "Addie, have a seat," Brenda said, using her painfully soft, heavily trained voice. Julian did not even bother to look up from his screen. "We are going to make this quick. Rivera, we are pivoting the company." Brenda folded her hands over the file. "Addie, Certigard is moving in a highly dynamic, hyper-visual direction. Unfortunately, after reviewing your recent performance and your clear reluctance to embrace Sierra's innovative initiatives, we have determined that you lack the future vision required for this new era. You are simply not a cultural fit for our energetic new environment. We are officially terminating your employment, effective at the end of the week." I sat perfectly still, staring at them. I was the single person keeping their entire back-end infrastructure from melting into a puddle of digital slag, and they were firing me because I would not validate a TikTok influencer's aesthetic delusions. Julian finally pocketed his expensive phone and looked at me with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. "You have exactly 3 days to hand over all system architecture, administrator keys, and root back-end access to Sierra and her team. We need a completely seamless transition before finals week kicks off next Monday. I expect your full, unconditional cooperation." Finals week, the absolute most brutal, high-traffic period of the entire academic year, where hundreds of thousands of panicked college students would be logging in simultaneously to take exams that dictated their futures. Handing the fragile system over to Sierra right before that stress test was the equivalent of handing a toddler a lit blowtorch in a room full of dynamite. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have threatened a massive wrongful termination lawsuit, or begged for their job, or stormed out of the glass room in a blaze of righteous fury. But as I sat there, observing Julian's arrogant, punchable face, something deep inside my brain just clicked off. The burning, exhausting frustration I had felt for weeks completely evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, crystalline calm. Why fight them? Why exhaust myself trying to save people who were so incredibly eager to drown? Understood, I said quietly. A slow, chilling smile crept onto my face, one they were too arrogant to decipher. I will ensure the transition is exactly what you asked for. I returned to my desk, locked my computer screen, opened my terminal, and began orchestrating the greatest act of malicious compliance in the history of corporate America. Over the previous month, Sierra had constantly parroted tech buzzwords she had heard on random podcasts, her absolute favorite being zero trust security architecture. She and Julian had explicitly demanded in multiple recorded executive meetings that our new anti-cheating system needed supreme control and absolute uncompromising lockdown protocols. I decided to give them exactly what they asked for: 100% strict compliance. I dove into the core source code of the platform and meticulously integrated Sierra's disastrous artificial intelligence, mapping it directly into the primary exam validation loop just as she wanted. But I made a few crucial, deeply buried adjustments to the enforcement protocols. I rewrote the penalty triggers. If the flawed eye tracker detected so much as a stray glance at a wall clock, a heavy blink, or a shadow moving across the background of a webcam, it would not just issue a standard warning, it would permanently lock the student out of their final exam. However, a locked exam logically requires an unlock mechanism. That is standard operational procedure. Usually, a university professor or a low-level tech support agent could manually review the footage and override a false positive with a simple click. Not anymore. I hard-coded the override permissions to comply strictly with Julian and Sierra's mandate for supreme executive control. I engineered the system architecture so that once a test was locked by the artificial intelligence, it could only be reopened through a direct, real-time biometric authentication ping, and I meticulously routed every single one of those biometric unlock requests exclusively to the registered master administrator accounts belonging to Julian and Sierra. They demanded the ultimate authority. I made sure they were the only ones who possessed it. For the next 3 days, I worked in absolute, calculated silence. I did not complain to my coworkers. I did not warn another soul. I just sat at my keyboard and typed, weaving their own arrogant demands into an inescapable digital cage. On my final afternoon, I packed my personal belongings into a small cardboard box. I ran one last diagnostic check on the master branch. The staging environment looked pristine on the surface. The user interface was sleek, modern, and highly responsive. To the untrained eye, it was a technological masterpiece ready for launch. But underneath that shiny, aesthetic exterior, I had meticulously built a fully loaded bear trap, perfectly concealed in the tall grass, its rusted steel jaws wired wide open, just waiting patiently for the prey to take one careless step forward. During my final 48 hours with system access, I performed what I like to call a reverse exorcism. I invited the demons back in. Over the years, I had quietly written dozens of invisible, automated fail-safes into the back-end architecture. These were tiny, rogue scripts designed to catch memory leaks, restart frozen application pools, and silently patch the catastrophic data dumps constantly generated by the front-end user experience team. I systematically went through the codebase and deleted every single one of those safety nets. Without my invisible crutches, their shiny, bloated user interface would have to stand on its own 2 feet, and I knew it had the structural integrity of a wet paper towel. Next, I opened the data center emergency alert configuration. The system was originally programmed to ping my phone the second server load crossed 85%. I wiped my name and contact information from the emergency roster completely. In my place, I hard-coded Julian's personal cell phone number, but I did not just set it to send simple text messages. I utilized an internal text-to-speech application programming interface, configuring the system so that every single critical failure would instantly trigger an automated, robotic voice call directly to Julian. When 5 o'clock finally arrived on my last day, I picked up my cardboard box and walked down to the main lobby. The building was dead quiet. I walked over to the security desk and placed my plastic key card on the cold granite counter. Marcus, the elderly security guard and genuinely the only person in that entire company worthy of an ounce of respect, looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Leaving us so soon?" "Addie?" Marcus asked, his voice rough but kind. "They decided they wanted a different direction, Marcus," I replied, offering a tight, genuine smile. I leaned in just a fraction closer. "Listen to me. Take next week off. Use those vacation days you have been saving up. Trust me, you do not want to be anywhere near this lobby come Monday morning." Marcus studied my face for a long, silent moment, then gave a slow, knowing nod. "Enjoy your weekend, kid." I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the stifling heat of a Friday evening Texas sunset. I did not look back. By the time I reached my car, I had already opened my phone and purchased a first-class ticket to a severely remote, sun-drenched beach town on the coast of Mexico. The plan was simple: white sand, cold drinks, and absolute, uncompromising radio silence. But I was not quite finished. As my car engine idled in the parking lot, I thought about the one hidden script I did not delete. I called it the Rivera Ghost Protocol. It was a dormant, highly encrypted backdoor buried beneath thousands of lines of legacy code. Sitting completely undetected at the very bottom of the server stack, I had programmed the protocol with a singular, devastating trigger. If the system's global error rate ever hit a critical red alert threshold, the protocol would wake up. It would automatically scrape the unedited, raw server log files, which was the absolute, undeniable proof of exactly whose code was destroying the platform, and email those logs directly to the inbox of the Federal Educational Audit Commission. I slipped my phone into my pocket, put the car in drive, and drove toward the airport. The bomb was planted in the dark, and the timer was officially ticking. Monday morning arrived with the quiet, terrifying inevitability of a tidal wave. At exactly 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 500,000 sleep-deprived college students across the United States sat down at their desks, opened their laptops, and logged into CertiGuard Solutions to take their final exams. These were organic chemistry tests, advanced calculus midterms, and grueling law school qualifiers. The collective academic weight of the nation rested entirely on our servers. For exactly 4 minutes, the system held together. Then, the massacre began. Sierra's highly aesthetic artificial intelligence woke up, stretched its digital legs, and immediately started executing students with the ruthless efficiency of a malfunctioning Terminator. The first wave of casualties hit at 4 minutes and 12 seconds past the hour. Tens of thousands of students were violently ejected from their exams, greeted only by a massive, glaring red screen flashing the words, "Cheating detected, exam permanently locked." The reasons for these bans were nothing short of spectacular. One student in Ohio was flagged and banned because she sneezed, causing her shoulders to momentarily leave the camera frame. A senior in California was permanently locked out of his quantum physics final because the morning sun shifted behind a cloud outside his window, slightly altering the contrast on his cheekbones. The artificial intelligence decided this was a malicious attempt to spoof the facial recognition matrix. Students who wore thick prescription glasses were eradicated instantly. Students who blinked too slowly were purged. If a roommate coughed in the background, if a neighbor's dog barked, if a student simply looked away from the screen for 2 seconds to mentally calculate a complex math problem, the merciless algorithm dropped the heavy digital guillotine. Because I had flawlessly implemented their precious zero-trust security architecture, the lockdown was absolute and uncompromising. There were no warnings. There were no secondary reviews by human proctors. The exams were sealed inside an impenetrable digital vault, and the only way to open that vault was through the biometric authentication protocols I had hardwired directly to the top executives. Back in Austin, the consequences of their arrogance arrived with apocalyptic force. At 8 minutes past the hour, Julian was likely enjoying his morning matcha when his custom designer smartphone buzzed. It was a push notification requesting a biometric fingerprint scan to unlock a student exam. He probably smiled, feeling powerful and in control. A second later, 2 more notifications arrived, then 50, then 400. By 8:15, the failing artificial intelligence was generating over 100,000 biometric override requests every single minute, funneling every single one of them straight into Julian and Sierra's personal devices. Julian's phone began vibrating so violently it practically danced off his mahogany desk. Then came the automated voice calls I had configured. A relentless robotic voice began calling Julian's number over and over again, screaming about critical infrastructure failure. He tried to silence it, but the sheer volume of incoming data traffic bottlenecked the processor. Within 3 minutes, Julian's $2,000 smartphone overheated, froze completely solid, and essentially became a very expensive, piping hot brick. Sierra's tablet suffered the exact same fiery fate, rendering them entirely powerless to stop the bleeding. With the administrators paralyzed, the chaos spilled out of the servers and flooded the internet. Social media erupted into a massive digital riot. Within half an hour, the hashtag #CertiGuard scam skyrocketed to the #1 trending topic worldwide. My phone, safely connected to the secure Wi-Fi at a beachside cabana in Mexico, buzzed with the delightful news. I scrolled through thousands of viral posts with a cold drink in my hand. There were videos of desperate biology majors sobbing hysterically into their webcams, begging the soulless red screen to let them finish their tests. There were furious, expletive-filled rants from tenured professors who realized they had zero administrative power to rescue their failing classes. Prestigious university deans were publicly threatening to boycott the platform entirely, tagging the company's official corporate accounts with demands for immediate legal restitution. Total, unmitigated disaster. Panic is a funny thing. Some people freeze in terror. Others, like Sierra, immediately seek out the nearest camera lens. Realizing her entire career was currently burning to ash, our chief innovation officer decided to fall back on the only skill she actually possessed. She went live. Sitting in her pristine, softly lit home office, Sierra launched an emergency live stream on 3 different social media platforms simultaneously. She had perfectly styled her hair to look slightly disheveled, mastering the absolute art of the distressed influencer aesthetic. Over 2 million angry students, furious parents, and confused investors poured into the broadcast within the first 5 minutes. "Guys, I am so heartbroken right now," Sierra began, her voice trembling with practiced, theatrical emotion. She stared deeply into the lens, blatantly ignoring the tidal wave of furious comments scrolling frantically up the screen. "CertiGuard is currently under a massive, coordinated cyber attack. We have reason to believe sophisticated Russian hackers are targeting our servers to disrupt the American educational system. My team is fighting so hard to protect your data. But this malicious external breach is causing the platform to crash." It was a bold, entirely shameless lie. She was trying to play the victim, spinning a wild narrative of foreign espionage to distract from the reality that her own garbage code was destroying the company. The chat paused for a fraction of a second, the sheer audacity of the claim momentarily stunning the massive audience. But I do not leave loose ends. When I integrated her artificial intelligence into the system, I also embedded a very specific, highly visible diagnostic tool directly into the application pool running on her personal computer. It was designed to trigger the moment the server logs detected an absolute failure of the eye-tracking algorithm. Right as Sierra squeezed out a single, perfectly calculated tear for the camera, a deafening, high-pitched warning siren blasted from her own desktop speakers. The sound was so loud and piercing, it distorted her expensive microphone. She jumped in her ergonomic chair, her eyes widening in genuine, unfiltered terror. Before she could reach for the mute button, a massive, unclosable diagnostic window violently hijacked her screen share, broadcasting itself directly to the millions of people watching. The text on the screen was massive, bold, and highlighted in flashing yellow. It read, "Critical failure. Artificial intelligence architecture malfunction. Internal code collapse. Zero external intrusion detected. The siren kept blaring loudly in the background. Sierra frantically mashed her keyboard, her manicured nails clicking desperately, but the pop-up was hard-coded to stay firmly on top of every other window. The entire internet watched in glorious high definition as her elaborate lie collapsed in real time. The chat exploded with a fury so intense it literally crashed the streaming platform's secondary chat server. She had tried to blame invisible hackers, and her own computer had just loudly, publicly called her a liar in front of the entire world. By 11 o'clock that morning, the entire CertiGuard network had flatlined. The servers were not just crashing, they were fundamentally, irreparably broken. The board of directors, safely tucked away in their penthouse suites, suddenly found themselves staring down the barrel of a legal firing squad. Over 40 top-tier universities issued immediate, unyielding ultimatums. They were threatening class-action lawsuits totaling tens of millions of dollars. The breach of contract penalties alone were enough to bankrupt the company 3 times over, and the federal government was already launching preliminary inquiries into the massive data disruption. Richard, the grizzled chairman of the board, who usually let Julian play chief executive officer just for the public optics, finally stepped in. He marched into the executive suite, looked Julian dead in the eye, and stripped him of all operational authority right there on the carpet. Julian was effectively neutered in under 60 seconds, but firing the idiot did not fix the bleeding servers. The in-house engineering team was completely locked out. The biometric zero-trust protocols I had set up were ironclad. They needed the original architect. They needed me. Richard used every corporate connection and private investigator he had on retainer to track down my secure satellite phone number. Down in Mexico, the sun was shining, the waves were crashing gently against the shore, and my margarita was perfectly chilled. When my phone buzzed on the plastic table, displaying a heavily encrypted Austin area code, I did not rush. I took a long, slow sip of my drink, listened to the seagulls for a moment, and then finally pressed the answer button. "Rivera," Richard barked the second the line connected. His voice was trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer panic. "We need a Zoom link, now!" I casually opened my laptop, positioned the high-definition camera so the pristine, crystal blue ocean was clearly visible in the background, and let them into the digital waiting room. The visual contrast was absolutely cinematic. I was sitting under a palm tree wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and a floral swimsuit cover-up, looking completely at peace. On the other side of the screen sat 7 elderly billionaires, crammed into a sterile, poorly lit boardroom. Their expensive silk ties were loosened, their collars were unbuttoned, and their faces were flushed with absolute terror. Julian and Sierra were sitting in the far corner of the room, completely silent, looking exactly like scolded children waiting for the principal to expel them. Richard did not waste time with pleasantries. He rapidly explained the catastrophic failure, the pending lawsuits, and the impenetrable locked system. The internal tech team says the architecture is completely sealed. You are the only person on Earth who can bypass those biometric locks and restore the core database. Addie, we will double your old salary. We will give you a massive bonus. Just log in and fix it. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed loudly through their expensive boardroom speakers. "Richard, I do not work for you anymore," I said, leaning back in my beach chair. "You fired me for lacking future vision. Remember, if you want my vision now, you are going to hire me as an independent emergency contractor, and my rates have adjusted significantly for inflation." The room went dead silent. Richard swallowed hard. "Name your price." I leaned into the camera, dropping the smile completely. "First, my hourly rate is $5,000. Second, before I type a single line of code, you will wire a non-refundable risk consulting retainer of $500,000 directly into my offshore account. Third, upon my return, I demand absolute, unquestionable control over the entire engineering department. No executives, no board members, and certainly no social media influencers will ever override my technical decisions again. The board members gasped audibly. $5,000 an hour was pure extortion. It was highway robbery. But they were losing millions of dollars every single minute the system stayed down. They had absolutely zero leverage, and they knew it. And finally, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that commanded the entire room. The most important condition of all, Julian and Sierra are going to sit in front of a high-quality camera and record a video. In this video, they will explicitly admit that they forced the deployment of broken, untested technology purely to generate social media engagement. They will confess that they completely ignored repeated safety warnings and data reports from the engineering team, and they will formally, publicly apologize to the millions of students they traumatized today, and they will apologize to me by name. This video will be entirely unedited, and you will post it to the front page of the company website and all social media channels before I touch my keyboard. Julian leaped out of his chair, his face turning a vibrant shade of purple. Are you insane? That will ruin us? That is absolute career suicide. You are already ruined, Julian, I replied smoothly, taking another leisurely sip of my margarita. I am just offering you the chance to survive the blast radius. You have exactly 3 minutes to decide before I close this laptop and go for a swim in the ocean. Tick-tock, gentlemen. Richard stared at the screen for a long, agonizing moment. He looked at the massive stack of multi-million-dollar lawsuit documents scattered across his mahogany desk. Then, he slowly turned his head and looked at Julian and Sierra with a level of utter, unmasked disgust that sent shivers down their spines. "Get the camera," Richard growled. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might shatter under the pressure. He turned back to the screen and gave a curt, defeated nod. "We accept all your terms. Ms. Rivera, send us your account details." The chime of my banking app was the sweetest sound I had heard all day. $500,000 had officially cleared into my offshore account. The retainer was secured. I set my margarita down on the plastic table, cracked my knuckles, and opened my terminal. It was time to activate God mode. I did not waste a single second trying to untangle or fix Sierra's horrific artificial intelligence. You do not try to repair a rotting house. You bulldoze it. I established a secure shell connection directly into the master server node, bypassing the biometric locks using the deepest level root access keys that I had never actually handed over. With a single, beautifully elegant command line, I completely wiped Sierra's entire source code repository from existence. It was gone in less than a heartbeat. Next, I pulled the pristine, stable architectural backup from our remote cold storage. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Exactly 14 minutes after I received the wire transfer, the massive green light on my dashboard illuminated, the core data structures synchronized. The system inhaled a massive breath of digital air and came back to life. Every single exam that had been unfairly locked was instantly restored to its exact state right before the crash. Not a single byte of student progress was lost. But right as I was about to close my laptop, my administrative dashboard flashed a violent, blinding red. Someone inside the Austin headquarters was attempting an unauthorized, highly destructive data purge. It was Sierra. Knowing she was about to be unceremoniously fired, she had bitterly opened her terminal and initiated a massive deletion script aimed directly at the primary grading database. Her plan was incredibly malicious. She wanted to wipe out millions of exam scores and blame the catastrophic data loss on my system restoration process, framing me for the ultimate failure to save her own fragile ego. She forgot one crucial detail. The Rivera Ghost Protocol was already awake, and it was watching everything. The moment Sierra's destructive script attempted to breach the database firewall, my hidden protocol slammed into it like a freight train. The script was instantly quarantined and neutralized, but the protocol did not stop there. It automatically executed its primary directive. It meticulously compiled Sierra's exact keystrokes, her machine's internet protocol address, and her active login credentials into a highly encrypted, undeniable digital dossier. Within milliseconds, that undeniable proof of deliberate corporate sabotage was sent directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. with a carbon copy forwarded to the Federal Educational Audit Commission. Sierra was no longer just losing her job. She was about to face multiple federal felony charges for intentionally attempting to destroy national educational infrastructure. Prison was a certainty. 24 hours later, the most humiliating video in corporate history went live across every single major social media platform. Julian and Sierra sat side by side under harsh fluorescent lights, looking pale and utterly defeated. In front of tens of millions of viewers, they choked out their forced, unedited confession. They admitted to prioritizing vanity over functionality. They confessed to ignoring my explicit safety warnings, and while with teeth practically grinding together, they formally apologized to the students and explicitly apologized to Addie Rivera. The fallout was spectacular. The company's stock price took a heavy beating, but my personal reputation within the global engineering community transformed into an absolute myth. Julian was immediately ousted from the company his own family built, completely stripped of his shares by a furious board of directors. The following Monday, I returned to the Austin office. There was no grand parade, no balloons, and no welcoming committee. I prefer it that way. I walked through the glass doors, gave a warm nod to Marcus the security guard, who had smartly taken his paid time off during the apocalypse, and stepped onto the engineering floor. The entire room of programmers went completely silent. No one said a word. But as I walked down the aisle, every single engineer simply stopped what they were doing and gave me a slow, profound nod of absolute respect. I sat down at my original desk, fired up my monitors, and opened the master server dashboard. The display glowed a comforting, stable green. I read the metrics at the top of the screen aloud to myself. Uptime 100%, errors 0. I took a sip of my black coffee, smiled, and started typing. America was running again. Thank you so much for listening to today's story on Boss Revenge Stories. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from. We love connecting with our audience around the world. If you found today's corporate revenge satisfying, please consider supporting our team with just a $1 donation. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the secure PayPal link located in the video description or the pinned comment below. Your support is the only way we can pay our hardworking staff, help them feed their families, and keep this channel alive to bring you even more incredible stories. Thank you for being the best part of our community.